Hi, I'm John Smith, and this is the first of a series of webcasts called Preparing for Russia. You're probably watching this because you're soon to have the adventure of going to Russia, probably on a missions trip. And we hope these webcasts will help you to have a better and more productive experience. The first of these is titled How Russians View Americans. You'll see below this webcast there's a sheet that has some thoughts and notes on it. You can right-click on that and download it, or just follow along with it as the webcast continues. So let's get started. So, how do Russians view Americans? After I'd been going to Russia for a number of years, I asked some of my Russian friends, how do you see we Americans? And I think they gave me honest answers. And many of them said the same three things. We think you Americans can be a little too loud, a little too proud, and a little too optimistic. What do they mean by those things? What do they mean that we're too loud? You know, we Americans tend to dress and to act in order to stand out. It's just a part of our culture. You're a unique individual, and you dress like that, you act like that, you want to stand out. While we dress and act in order to stand out, Russians tend to dress and act in order to blend in. Maybe that's due to living for 70 years under a very oppressive governmental regime. If you stood out, you might be blamed. You didn't want to stand out. There's a Russian expression, one of my favorites. It says, the tallest blade of grass gets cut first. Don't be the tallest blade of grass. Don't stand out. Now, sometimes we Americans perceive Russians as being quiet, withdrawn, even unfriendly. It's not that they are. In fact, once you get to know them, they're a very warm and welcoming people. And when you've made a Russian friend, you have a friend for life. But they do tend to be a little slower forming relationships, a little slower to make eye contact. They see us as a little too pushy, a little too loud. After I'd been to Russia a number of times, I experienced that myself. I was in Moscow on the metro with a couple of Russian friends, and everyone on the metro was just kind of sitting there or standing there. They were quiet, they were looking down, they were reading. But at the other end of the metro car, I heard some commotion, some laughing, some boisterous talk, and I can remember thinking, they must be Americans. And looking down the car, indeed, they were. And I got to admit to you that I kind of pulled back a little bit, hoping to look Russian. I was a little embarrassed by the loudness and the boisterousness, the insensitivity of those Americans. Let's be careful that we don't come on that way. Let's not be too loud. Russians also see us as sometimes being a little too proud. We like to talk about America as the greatest nation on the face of the earth. We like to talk about the American way, American ingenuity, American know-how. Now, I'm sure that you, like me, am very grateful to be an American. I'm very grateful for this country that we live in. But we need to remind ourselves that when we go to Russia, we're going to represent the kingdom of God. We're going as servants. We're going to fellowship and be part of and good guests in a culture that's somewhat different from our own. A number of years ago, 1958, a novel was written called The Ugly American, written by Eugene Burdick. And that book talked about an American, a diplomat, whose name was Homer Atkins. And Homer Atkins was an ugly American. The novel describes him as not only physically unattractive, but his very demeanor and his very behavior was repulsive. And one of the characters in that book, talking about Homer and Americans in general, says this: for some reason, the American people I meet when they come here to my country are not the same as the ones I knew in the United States. A mysterious change seems to come over Americans when they go to a foreign land. They become loud and ostentatious. They come on as if they're superior. We need to be careful that we're not perceived as ugly Americans. We need to be careful that we don't come on too proud. You know, in the kingdom of God, the ultimate value is humility. We represent the kingdom of God, and so we want to be humble as we approach our Russian friends. We're not there to represent a culture. We're there to represent the kingdom of God. We're there to be servants. Let's not be ugly Americans, but let's be like those talked about in the book of Isaiah. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So what do Russians mean when they say we Americans can be a little too optimistic? It's not that Russians see themselves as pessimistic. They see themselves as realistic, and we Americans as being sometimes a little unrealistic. In one of the James Bond movies, James Bond is talking to a Russian spy. Hey, it's a James Bond movie. It's a beautiful female Russian spy. And he's trying to convince her that working together they can make things better, but she's not buying it. She says, "Mr. Bond, Russia has been through a long, cold winter." She's not talking about a season of the year. For most of the 20th century, Russia was in a long, cold winter, and it's left its mark. One of my friends in Russia is named Ludmila. She was for many years the director of the Lukyanova orphanage. And she'll write me a letter from time to time, and I know if that letter comes in the spring, it's always going to begin with this sentence: "Well, we managed to survive another winter." That's a part of the Russian psyche. Surviving the winter is a big thing. We Americans tend to work for success. Russians have learned to work for survival. We Americans tend to be surprised when something that's planned doesn't work. Russians tend to be surprised when something that's planned does work. We Americans tend to think out loud. We tend to dream big dreams. We tend to see situations and perceive what could be. And sometimes when we talk about the things that could be, when we talk about the dreams, people hear that as commitments on our part. Commitments that maybe we can't keep. When Russia first opened to Westerners in the early 1990s, many ministries, many humanitarian aid organizations rushed into Russia. And they promised big things. Most of those things were never accomplished. Most of those organizations are no longer there. The philosophy of our ministry has always been to under-promise but over-deliver, because too often we Americans have over-promised and under-delivered. Let's be careful what we promise. We go under-promising and hoping to be surprised by all that God does accomplish through us, through our ministry. Well, let's go to Russia. But let's be careful that when we go, we don't go like ugly Americans. Let's not go too loud, too proud, promising more than we can realistically deliver, but rather, let's go lovingly, humbly. Let's go trusting God to do great things through us as we simply have a servant spirit. In other words, let's go to Russia like Jesus. For now, das Vidanya.